In this video, we will discuss the key differences between the different decades in the 19th century and how to easily tell the difference between these said decades. From 1800 to 1809, we see pretty strictly the wearing of only a white muslin gown. The gown was slim-fitting, but it was a relaxed form, and the material helped create that effect. There is a very high empire waist throughout the entirety of this decade. You'll also find that for these regular dresses, not talking about the court dresses, but for the regular dresses, there was no interruption of trim up until the latter part of this decade, looking at about 1808. And 1808 as well is when we see the puffed sleeves come into fashion and a little bit more details arising on the garments. I should also note that between 1800 and 1807, dresses had trains, both for day wear and evening wear. Stepping in from 1810 to 1819, we see that the dresses are becoming more and more detailed, and the skirt of the garment is becoming more stiff, as well as climbing up from the floor to about the ankle length. And we see the puffed sleeve becoming the complete norm for day wear and evening wear. And the waist, as the decade goes on, still remains at the empire placement. The 1820s is known as a transitional period, from the more demure styles of the 1810s to the more extravagant styles of the 1830s. It is at this time that we see the hem of the skirt raised a bit. The sleeves during this time expand throughout the decade. The waistline also steadily descends. In addition, in the 1820s up until 1822, we see a train on the evening dresses. But after that, we see the dresses in a slender dome shape, where there is no train. As the decade progresses, more ornamentation and detail work is found along the dresses. Garments also become more vibrant and colorful. In the 1830s, we see extreme detail work, ornamentation, and over-the-top motifs displayed on the dresses. At the beginning of the decade, sleeves are very large and come to their largest point in 1836. They later slowly decline in size and also move down the arm. As time goes on, the skirts begin to get larger, and the waist drops to the natural position. After 1836, there is an emphasis on modesty, which follows in the dresses. They become increasingly plain. At the beginning of the 1840s, we see less decoration and ornamentation, but as the period goes on, more ornamentation begins to cover the dresses. The skirts also get fuller all the way around, and this increases as the decade draws nearer to the 1850s. We see sloped shoulders as a norm throughout this period, both in evening wear and for day wear. Day wear features typically a high neckline and the entire body being covered up, while evening looks feature off-the-shoulder sleeves, more decoration, the waist dropping to a V point, narrow-fitting sleeves in the daytime, and colorful dresses. The 1850s is quite similar to the 1840s, but it is at this time that the crinoline is invented, which helps support the growing size of the skirt. Skirts are in a dome shape, and the dress is evenly distributed around the whole circumference without an emphasis in the back. But in the latter portion of this decade, the volume of the skirt does slightly shift towards the back of the dress. Skirts were often ruffled, and there was an emphasis on feminine motifs. Sloping shoulders were still in vogue, and during the day, the whole body would typically be covered up, featuring a high neckline. Large pagoda sleeves were also indicative of this time period, as well as off-the-shoulder evening gowns. In the beginning portion of the decade, around 1863, dresses reached their widest point in fullness. Some skirts were said to be 15 to 12 feet in circumference. In addition, the skirt's emphasis begins to draw near the back of the gown. Throughout the entirety of the decade, this grows steadily and increases, as the skirt also shifts in size and becomes smaller, but still keeping its volume at the back. Feminine ornamentation fades in the beginning of the decade, but quickly picks up towards the end of the decade. At the start of the 1860s, geometrical motifs were more in vogue and favored amongst the women. Pagoda sleeves remained fashionable, but as the decade went on, there was a closing at the cuff of the sleeve. Gowns were vibrant in color and still featured sloping shoulders. Evening dresses also featured off-the-shoulder sleeves. In the 1870s, there was a full concentration of volume at the back of the skirt. Women's wear was complex, colorful, and a bit restrictive. It was at this time that the first bustle came into fashion. The waistline grew to be higher than the natural waist. Lower sloped shoulders also defined this era. And during this time, although bodices typically featured high necklines during the day, it became more common to have an open V-neck or a square neckline during the daytime. Garments were ornately decorated with trim, ruffles, lace, braids, and all kinds of fittings. But around 1876, a new silhouette came into fashion, known as the princess line or the natural form line, where the bustle completely collapsed. The dress was snug around the hips, and the bodices lacked a bustle, so the volume instead spilled from below the hips or from below the knees. This fullness could extend into long trains, and it was common both in day wear and evening wear. In the 1880s, the princess line continued until 1883, where now a hard, shelf-like protruding bustle was the fashion. By 1886, the bustle reached its largest point, and by 1888, it began to shrink, until 1891, which gave way to the bell-shaped dresses of the 1890s. Day bodices in the 1880s had high, narrow shoulders and very tight sleeves. There were high, fitted collars, sometimes boned for shaping. This time period featured an exuberant amount of details, flounces, ruffles, trims, and beautiful elements. The colors of the garments were also quite notable and beautiful. Evening dresses had shorter sleeves that ranged from elbow length to mere shoulder straps. There was also lower necklines and long, beautiful trains. It was also at this time that outerwear expanded, and we see coats being used. By the 1890s, we see the bell-shaped silhouette come back into fashion. It is also at this time that small puff sleeves began to take hold, and grew and grew and grew, reaching their largest size in 1895, and thereafter steadily declined. The silhouette was completely balanced by a nipped-in waist, creating an hourglass figure and effect. Morning dresses had high necklines and long sleeves, and often were accompanied by a shirtwaist and a skirt pairing. Afternoon dresses opened at the neck and would feature shortened sleeves. And during the evening, a woman would bare her chest and her arms. Dresses of the day were made of very fine materials, but there was an emphasis on simplicity. The skirts often didn't feature very many ruffles or exuberant details, but there was an emphasis on the beauty and coloration of the fabrics themselves.